Glenn, or? Okay.
All yours.
All right. Solomon the Wise. And I think there's a bit of irony in that. Go this way. Oh, it's not on.
Last time you just pointed and he did it for you.
Yeah,
That too. We got that working this morning.
yeah, it worked better with you doing it.
Well, that might be what we're doing.
Oh, okay. All right. And we have a collect. Let's say this together. Blessed Lord, who caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us in our Savior Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Let me just say something about that prayer. That is one of my favorites in the prayer book. It was a composition of the compiler of the first prayer book, Thomas Cranmer, and I think it encapsulates a good bit of the Anglican approach to Scripture. Scripture is written for our learning and instruction. It provides models for us. And above all, it points to the gospel. And so, you know, we read Scripture really for the gospel, to look for the gospel in it. So, okay. And this is from the sealing of the Lutheran Church of the Ascension in Jerusalem. And you'll notice the spelling of Solomon. And it's from Cathedral of Bayeux and from St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. So you see Solomon inspired quite a bit of Christian artwork. Okay. And this is part of the court history we didn't get to touch on last time, the final two chapters, which go over into 1 Kings. And it's a portrayal of David and how Solomon comes to be proclaimed as king. So you see some of the behavior we talked about of David last time, kind of continuing into these chapters. David, in fact, is kind of portrayed as almost senile old man who really is kind of out of touch with what's going on around him. His oldest son, Adonijah, who assumes he's going to become king, is out acting like he's king already. And Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, gets kind of like in a little plot that's hatched by Nathan the prophet. And they go together to David and they say, Bathsheba says, "Do you remember that you promised that my son Solomon would be king?" And he is brought back to remembering that. And then he kind of springs into action. And then Solomon is proclaimed king. Okay, and I didn't mention Abishag the Shunammite. If Father Lonnie were here, he'd probably, oh, here he comes. He'd probably have us all, he'd probably have us all say it 3 times, you know. Abishag the Shunammite. But she is brought in to keep David warm at night. So, if you get the picture.
You have a picture?
Yeah, actually, there is one. Yeah, Abishag the Shunammite brought to warm the aging David. And Joseph Epstein, I think, is the artist on that. Okay, next. And this is where David is promising that,
Is that a Rembrandt?
I don't, it didn't have the attribution on the image. I don't think it is.
It's fascinating. It looks so
Yeah.
much more English than.
Yeah,
At least.
yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
There's so many, works of art that are done depicting biblical scenes. It's,
The second paragraph of the text that you had, can we go back to that?
sure.
In second Kings 2 there, David instructs Solomon to eliminate Joab and Shimei. I don't know who Shimei is. Is
Shimei.
Joab the leader of the armies that?
He was, the leader of commander of David's army, and he killed Abner, and
Yes.
who was the commander of
Abner
Saul's army.
Was the?
And he had instructed that no harm was to come to Abner.
But he was the one who arranged for the Hittite fellow to be killed. Bathsheba.
That was Joab. Yeah,
Huh?
that was Joab. Joab is really kind of,
Well, isn't that who that is?
yeah, Joab. Yeah, Abner is.
Well, why
yeah.
did David want him eliminated if he had been so faithful and carried out his order?
Well, that's a question to ask yourself, but yeah. Joab, is kind of the enforcer. If you're depicting this as a kind of,
This is called palace intrigue.
yes. But Joab defied some of David's specific orders in the greater service of David. So he was being realistic, he was a real politic guy, and David was trying to maintain an image that I'm not really responsible for all this bad stuff that's going on, but, Joab did it.
It sounds like the last of the Roman emperors.
Well, there was this idea of blood guilt, and Joab hadn't been punished for the innocent people he had killed. And Shemaiah was the fellow who cursed David when he fled from Jerusalem, when Absalom, seized the city and was in rebellion, and he threw rocks at David and cursed him. And
I noticed he was killed while at the altar seeking sanctuary.
Adonijah was, yeah.
No, but Joab killed while.
Oh, yeah, he was, Adonijah, yes, yeah, yeah.
Like St. Thomas.
Yeah,
like Thomas.
they came to Solomon and said, he's seeking refuge at the altar.
Like
And
Thomas.
Solomon said, go back and kill him anyway.
Like Thomas of Becket. Was that his name?
Yeah, Thomas, yeah.
That was, anyway,
Is that what, Henry II?
one of those Henrys.
Yeah, one of the Henrys, yeah. He said, who will take care of this irksome.
No, it wasn't Becket, it had to be later than that.
Yeah, this is definitely real politic to the nth degree. Yeah, so, yeah. So a lot of the undercurrents in the court history of David have that. So it is kind of ironic that some of David's last words are, take care of these people for me, which is kind of how it seems, how it comes across. Okay, let's go on, Glenn. Yeah, Solomon anointed king by Zadok. That should be a D instead of a K.
Yeah.
And the other priest was kind of retired, Abiathar. That was kind of part of the deal of getting David's opponents out of the way, but he wasn't killed. So, okay. And Adonijah seeks refuge at the altar. He was spared temporarily. Okay. All right. And this kind of intersected with our first lesson today. Could somebody read that for us? Okay, Kyle?
At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted." You want me to keep going?
Sure.
Okay. "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this great people of yours?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you all." Keep going.
Mhm. Yeah. You're doing great.
I didn't realize what I was signing up for here.
It just goes on and on and on. No, I think this is it.
"I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life." Then Solomon awoke. It had been a dream. He came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. He offered up burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all his servants.
And that's a depiction of this dream prayer.
How old was he when he asked that?
You know, that's a good question. Probably in his 20s.
Oh, okay.
At some point, he said something about, I'm just a child, and then they talked about, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And it confused me a bit, but I think you're right, he was a young man.
Yeah.
And thinking himself a child.
Okay. And this is really the first case that displays the wisdom of Solomon. And it's a rather famous story, a story of two prostitutes who come to him arguing over which the child belongs to which one of them, and he has to settle the issue. Would somebody read that for us?
I'll read.
Okay, Suzette.
Later, two women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the two of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son I had born."
You want to pass it off?
I do.
Okay.
Please, somebody.
But the other woman said, "No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours." The first said, "No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine." So they argued before the king. Then the king said, the one says, "This is my son who is alive, and your son is dead." While the other says, "Not so, your son is dead, and my son is the living one." So the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, divide the living boy in two, and they give half to the one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, please, Lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other said, it shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, give her the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice.
And that is a depiction. It's like in Victorian garb.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and would someone read this?
I will.
Okay.
God gave Solomon very great wisdom, discernment, and breadth of understanding as vast as the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else. His fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He would speak of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows in the wall. He would speak of animals and birds and reptiles and fish. People came from all the nations to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house that you are building. If you will walk in my statutes, obey my ordinances, and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my promise with you that I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and will not forsake my people Israel. If you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, and I will cut Israel off from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a taunt among all peoples. This house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of the land of Egypt and embraced other gods, worshiping them and serving them. Therefore, the Lord brought his disaster upon them.
Okay, this is just a general question about Solomon and his reign and building projects. Forced labor was used to build the temple, the palace, and fortified cities. Non-Israelites in the land were enslaved as laborers, while Israelites were made soldiers and officials. 530 chief officers supervised the laborers, and there were 12 kind of superintending officials for each tribe. Okay, go on. And would someone read this for us?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. The whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Solomon has many foreign wives whose gods he comes to worship, and for whom he builds places of sacrifice. Yahweh is angry. Then the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this matter, that he should not follow other gods, but he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your mind, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of your father, David, I will not do it in your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. I will not, however, tear away the entire kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen.
Okay, so we kind of get a general picture, overall picture of Solomon's rule, kind of a real quick one, and we'll probably go back to some of these when we look at our questions. One chapter we didn't touch on was chapter 8. That was, I think, part of the second lesson today, but that's a very important chapter in Kings. That's one of the kind of central pieces because it displays what the temple was to be, how God was to be present in the temple. God was not enthroned in the temple, he was present according to how he wanted to be present. It says his name, he allowed his name to dwell there. But God can't be contained, so that wasn't his home, but that was the place where he was worshiped and where his name dwelled. And kind of chapter 8 really brings that all out. Okay, who is Abishag the Shunammite? Heating pad, okay.
She was a teenage heater
Okay.
to warm David in his bed. Now, why his wife wasn't there doing that, I don't understand.
Okay.
He had a few.
They have 700.
A wife, yeah.
Yeah, Solomon. And there's some things probably going on behind the surface.
Like what?
Well,
I don't get it.
Things happen when we get older.
yeah, the king was supposed to be hardy, vigorous, in his right mind, and all these things. And this was kind of a test of whether that was going on.
Abishag also married one of David's sons, right?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I mean, she got around.
Well, okay, now, how did that happen? It's connected with Adonijah.
Yeah.
Okay, Adonijah is not king, but Solomon says, okay, go home and don't cause any trouble. And then Adonijah goes to Bathsheba and Solomon's mother and says, hey, can you ask Solomon for a favor? I'm really in love with Abishag. Can you ask Solomon to give me Abishag? And what happens?
Interesting things.
Yeah, Solomon's hair catches on fire and he says he deserves to die, go out. And Adonijah is killed. Why would Adonijah be killed for asking for the hand of Abishag?
Jealousy. Well,
He liked her. Yeah, he liked her a lot.
they apparently had a different moral standard than we do.
Yeah, it was very different. Yeah, it's very different. But Abishag was one of David's women, one of part.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a concubine. And for Adonijah to say, give me one of my father, the former king's women, what does that show that Adonijah really wants?
Power to be king.
Power. So this was seen as a way of Adonijah's trying to get, trying to rebel or
When they speak of hundreds of wives and concubines, is that a literal thing? I mean, how could you know
that.
More than a dozen?
How old was he when he died?
Does anybody have an answer for that? That's a very good question. Yeah.
It was a status symbol among rulers, how many women were available to them and had to retain their integrity and purity except for having relations with the king or the ruler. It also had to do with a patriarchal attitude of the times that only certain women could bear and take the genetic history with them to fruition and be children to the king.
So he probably did not even know the names of.
Right, a lot of these are political marriages. You know, you enter into a treaty with a neighboring city or kingdom, and the treaty is sealed with the marriage.
Even Abraham had one of those. Hagar was supposedly an Egyptian princess who was given to Abraham as a present from an Egyptian king, not the king, but one of them.
And Roger had.
Well, you know, the Romans imprisoned, or they held the captives of these different tribes on the periphery that they dealt with. They would take them and educate them.
Okay.
And they were basically prisoners, even though they were very privileged prisoners. And I have a feeling the women were the same thing.
Yeah.
They were locked up as a pledge, so they wouldn't break a treaty or an understanding with some neighboring peoples.
And there's probably a good bit of exaggeration here.
I think so, yes.
So Solomon
How many
has.
did he say, hundreds?
Right.
Well,
Yeah, 700
well,
wives and 1,000.
I don't think there are 700 treaties that could be made.
No.
Anyway, maybe a little
Right.
exaggeration.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm sure
Just a
he
little.
had-
Yeah.
But I'm sure he had a harem that, I don't know how many there were, but I'm sure it was more than one, and probably more than a dozen.
He needed a big Rolodex.
Yeah.
And
Speed dial,
he might never have even seen some of these women, but they were not allowed to leave. They
Right.
were his hostages, so to speak.
Yeah.
They were not allowed to
Yeah.
go free or go back to their country.
I think there's some exaggeration here, so.
There's a question, looks like.
Okay, yeah.
iPhone 64.
Yep, there's a comment in there that the text says that David didn't have relations with Abishag.
Well, didn't, and the question is could he have? Which is, part of the test,
Dying, wasn't he? It was close to death.
or senile, and that a test for how, if he's still vigorous and active and, and sharp-witted. So how would you describe David at the end of his rule?
I think he was trying to tidy things up for Solomon, and he did that by saying, you got to get rid of these people, you got to do this, so that Solomon could start with a clean slate without potential, I won't call them enemies, but competitors out there.
Yeah.
Which was fairly common.
Okay. Next question. What role did Bathsheba play in Solomon becoming king?
Turn him mama.
Yeah.
Probably whispering in David's ear.
I kind of had to laugh when I read the story version because it mentioned specifically when she asked David, do you remember promising Solomon the throne?
Yeah.
And then when he agrees, she says something along the lines of, may King David live forever or
Right.
whatever, kind of like almost, I read it as kind of satire.
Okay, so if I can get this from you, I can get other things.
And then she's,
Okay.
But obviously she played a pretty major role in Solomon getting to the throne.
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, yes. What was the source of Solomon's wisdom? Did he get his knowledge in college?
A gift from God, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of
I don't think any college or university gives you
gives you
a
wisdom.
degree in wisdom.
No. Sometimes it's, knowledge maybe, but not wisdom. Okay, okay. It came from God, and is there anything more we can say about that?
I think it proceeded out of his, at the time, his humility. God was incredibly pleased with his request. Most of the rulers of the time were seeking, evidence of their power. And he said, okay, I'm just a child. I don't even know how to get in and out of the door. I need wisdom to please let me have wisdom to rule these people. And so God was so pleased that he didn't just give him wisdom, he gave him all the wisdom that he could possibly hold. Solomon was special. He had an amazing brain. He had incredible energy.
Mm-hmm.
And he was admired by a lot of people, and he was supposedly very handsome, all that stuff. He was the vision of a real king in their minds. But he didn't ask for rewards for that. He asked God for the humility to know the difference between good and evil.
Okay. So is this an act of grace? Yeah.
And I think these passages, I don't know how they are connected to the so-called wisdom literature, but that idea was that God's wisdom in Proverbs and all those other classified as the wisdom. But I think these passages reflect the author's vision of what God's justice would be, what the kingdom should be. And I think we do the same thing today. The government does this, but what it should do is, and we have an idea of what a democracy should be, what justice and fairness should be for people. And I think this is what these passages.
An image of the ideal.
Yes, and it's an image of a just and society where people prosper and justice is carried out, and
the king has wisdom.
And the king has wisdom and so on. I think that's what we're looking at here.
Okay.
I think it's kind of interesting that Solomon was the product of David's greatest sin, really.
Okay.
That when he desired Bathsheba and then had her husband killed so that he could possess her, and this child was born from that, and then yet he goes on to be blessed by God and one of their wisest rulers and all. I just think that's kind of interesting that even though he was born out of sin, basically.
So there's kind of like forgiveness and mercy and
God's grace to Solomon.
And all that in the background,
Came into being.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. I think it just constantly reminds us that God has a plan. We thought it was terrible and sinful that he did what he did, and that David did what he did, but God had a plan, and this was the part of it. And it makes me stop all the time and not be judgmental, not be, that I know he has a plan for me, for the people I love, and to just take it in stride.
Something good can come out of all this mess, Okay.
Yeah, I think following up on the humility of Solomon and his wisdom, I think part of what really pleased God so much was Solomon's initial reliance upon God. He wasn't seeking the power of the throne, which I think God had been most angry about initially when the people clamor for a king from the get-go. God clearly, when he was talking to Samuel, says, look, they've rejected me. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. And I think Solomon is the first example we really see, outside of David, seeking after God's own heart of saying, look, you have the power and you have the wisdom, and I want some of that. He's not seeking the power for himself.
Yeah, I think of Solomon's wisdom in much more simple terms. It's just common sense. And I've been an arbitrator where you have a bunch of facts in front of you, and when you step back and just look at the big picture,
Yeah.
the answer comes to you. It's just common sense. You look at it, and that's with the young baby, they're gonna split in half.
Oh, okay. Well,
That's just-
we'll get
That's
to
just common
that.
sense. At who really loved the baby.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. Besides wisdom to govern, what does Solomon get?
Long life,
Long life,
riches.
riches,
Everything.
everything, superabundance.
The kingdom torn out of his hands.
Yeah, and that's to come, yeah. Okay. Is the story of the two prostitutes and the child a display of wisdom in action?
Is there a difference between common sense and wisdom?
Yeah.
I don't know, I hadn't thought about that.
Oh, sorry.
I have an appreciation for sneakiness.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a sneaky way to find out who had the true love for the baby.
That was manipulative.
Yep,
Yeah.
well, I like sneaky better than manipulative.
As with all these stories, there's a lot we don't know. Perhaps the real mother really didn't want to have the baby anyway. She just hated the other woman. I mean,
But
one doesn't know.
he's kind of making them show who they are and the choice they made. Is that what? Okay.
Isn't there a
You know, the
biblical
fact that
phrase
there
somewhere
were
about
two-
wise as serpents?
Innocent as doves, wise as serpents, and innocent as doves. Yeah. Wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
There you go, yes.
Yeah.
So that's her sneaky.
Okay.
No, I was gonna say the fact that there are two prostitutes, at least in my mind, neither one of them would have conceived a child willingly. I mean, it was an accident.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
you know, it's not just there was one lover in each one of them's lives. You know, there would have been many lovers, if you will, you want to call them that. And then it so happens that each one of them got pregnant on about the same time.
Yeah, and the fact they're prostitutes who come to the king for judgment, what does that say anything?
I think the passage is interesting because it seems to accept in some way in the society that there were, it's called a house in the passage, but it was a brothel.
Okay.
And it was in a town supposedly. And I don't know, it existed, which is interesting to me because I suspect it wasn't the only one.
And it was a violation of the law, the Torah.
But I suspect they existed and everybody knew they existed. And it's a bit like Rahab the harlot, who lived and people, it was a part of their culture and society. The Bible doesn't talk much about that, but we get a glimpse of it here.
Mary?
Just occurred to me that who is the biological mother of the child doesn't actually matter. Solomon put the child in the hands of the woman who would love the child.
That's good. That's a good insight. Yeah. Very good. Now, the question I earlier asked, the fact that the prostitutes are coming to the king for judgment, is that kind of does that strike you as a typical scene?
No,
Or is it reflective of something else going on?
it was reflective of the fact that Solomon was willing to follow through with his devotion to God by giving anyone who needed justice the opportunity to come before him and get it. It's almost, and that's almost, when you look at the Arthurian legend, that was also a reflection of that concept. It's like God was pushing that, you know. Everybody needs justice. The rich can't hire the lawyers. The rich have to have justice from somebody. So Solomon, are you willing? Apparently he was, because he didn't ask for more power. He asked for the wisdom to judge. And that means judging between whoever shows up in front of him.
Okay. So the poor and the downcast can come to get justice from the king. Okay. Okay. Could a wise judge repeat this as a model in other disputes? Or I have an example, but Bo was going to say something about this.
You sort of hit on what I was going to ask before I saw the question on question 6, which is, we are saying this is wisdom or common sense or something.
Right.
When we're actually murdering a baby in front of the court, with a lot of blood.
Yeah.
I try to think of what would be a good corollary in 2023. Someone was to go before our courts or before, whatever our supreme leader is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it as the president, but, somebody, and say, hey, what do I do? Does it go to child services? Does it go to foster care? What happened? What would we think of as being a corollary? And what would make it wise in today's society? I mean, we sort of take it as, I think, 3,000 years gone by, so we can live in, we're not living in the Bronze Age where we're killing things left and right.
Yeah. There was in the Talmud, a rabbi said, if I had been there, I would have choked him, Solomon, because he violates the Torah. He doesn't rely on 2 witnesses or 3 judges. He, acts on his own kind of impulsively, it seems like. I read another case where a judge in Chicago in the 1920s tried to replicate this. There was a biological mother and a foster mother, each wanted to adopt the child, and they were contending over the child in the courtroom. So the judge decided to play a trick like this, and he had cameras kind of put around the courtroom so he could get a picture of the reaction of the mothers when he gave his decision. So he said, I'm not going to let either one of you have the child. The child's going into state custody. And so he had, and the pictures around the courtroom showed the reaction of the 2 mothers, and the mother who was the foster mother and wanted to adopt the child was in tears and her lip was quivering. The biological mother had really no reaction to that. And so that, was not, that experiment didn't really succeed. The biological mother, it looked like she was not reacting at all. But the mother who wanted to adopt the child, had been a foster mother, reacted. And his goal was to find out who was the biological mother who would want to keep the child. So kind of didn't work in that case. But a judge would be taking a lot on to kind of replicate. Do you think would be taking a lot on to kind of repeat something like that? Okay, let's go to the next one. What does this story say about the gift, about the wisdom given to Solomon?
fascinated to hear about how deep and grand the wisdom that he was given
Yeah.
was, the knowledge that he was given.
Yeah.
And the fact that he threw it all away and did exactly what God told him not to, just baffled me. It just
Oh.
totally baffled me. You know, why would you do that?
Because the human ego can only take so much worship. And then the ego becomes the God.
Okay.
And
Let's-
because of his promise to David, God let it go.
Okay.
I don't understand.
Okay, and this is what made Solomon's wisdom so special was its superhuman character. It did not originate in his own mind, but came to him through divine revelation as a gift bestowed on him by God. So it's just kind of comes out of the blue. It's not something you can calculate or repeat, or predict. It just kind of came to him.
Well, thinking about being in the position of being the king and these two women come with this infant, and one says it's mine, the other one says it's mine. The first thing to come to my mind to do would not be to say, I'm gonna cut it in two.
Right.
So the fact that it came to his mind, here's how we resolve this, it seems sort of a bolt out of the blue, so to speak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
That would not have come to my mind.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of let me do something random to bring out the woman who really loves this child the most. That.
Well, the eighth question is intriguing to me. But it's basically asking, well, what kind of wisdom did Solomon have?
Okay, yeah.
Do you have wisdom when you are good at numbers? Is that a kind of, can you have wisdom in that?
No.
It's in.
Well, the genius is in
You mean to
numbers.
like creative accountants?
No, it's been a long time since I read about mathematicians, but I'm in awe of mathematicians because I'm so stupid when it comes to math. But some of these people just swim in a universe of wonderful numbers, which I can't comprehend.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have wisdom when you're dealing with numbers? And I'm talking about math.
Okay.
Not engineering or anything like that uses math, but the mathematicians themselves. Can you have wisdom in that field? Can you have wisdom? There are three fields where the work of young people, children, is considered on the same level as the work of adults. What are the three fields? Music, mathematics, and chess. Do you have wisdom in those fields? I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know what it would look like. I'm so removed from that world. So the question to me is, what sort of wisdom?
Okay.
And you said common sense, and because that's a kind of wisdom, common sense. So what else does this say? Does this simple, it's kind of a fool's solution to the problem, isn't it? Well, we'll cut the baby in half, and you can have half, this woman can have one half, the other. That's kind of a simpleton's solution, isn't it? Is that wisdom? The Bible, the story, the authors presented it as wisdom, whether we believe it or not, but to them, that was a kind of parable of wisdom.
Kristen.
I think there's a difference in being smart and being wise.
Right.
I think there's a difference in being smart in something and
Yes,
being wise.
wise, that's true.
I think wise is almost like a forethought, maybe even something philosophical that you understand versus like facts and numbers and like very practical things. I think wisdom is kind of and follow
But
God the same.
mathematicians, real mathematicians do not deal in practice.
Well, I do nothing with numbers. I am more of a numerical, so I can't answer that one for
When
you.
it comes to
Is
numbers.
Solomon here kind of, he can see into the heart of these two women, and he knows something is going on, and it's kind of an intuitive grasp of the truth, but he needs to bring it out into the open before he can make a judgment.
Well, that's
Is something like
kind of
that going
wisdom,
on?
To listen to people,
Yeah.
listen before you make a judgment. And Jesus
Yeah.
himself says, judge not, that you be not
Yeah.
judged, that you be judged.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the kind of wisdom we talk.
Which is wisdom is subjective, because at first I thought, oh, that is a really wise way to see
Yeah.
who wants the baby, but then when you mentioned like a real life one that happened more recently, like that's actually not wise at all, because you can't, someone's reaction to something may not show what's inside. So
Yeah.
like, if someone's in shock, they may shut down and they can't react.
Yeah.
So you also have to consider that too. I think his wisdom may have been subjective at times.
And it's kind of unique to the situation.
Right.
I know. Yeah,
Can I say something about that?
sure.
Intuitive wisdom, I think, is what we're dealing with.
Okay.
Different parts of the brain deal with situations. Intuitive wisdom seems to deal with more than one or two parts of the brain and how we process stuff. And when intuitive wisdom takes over, you gotta hope you're dealing with human beings. Because intuitive wisdom is not gonna work between two cats or two mathematical problems. Intuitive wisdom is specifically given so that humans can evolve and get along.
Yeah.
Solomon was an example of the Lord developing, in other words, developing a better human being.
Okay. Well, we've talked about his humility in asking for wisdom. We talked about him getting it from the outside, right? It was a gift from God. He didn't manufacture it on his own or study for it. And it's unique to the situation. And, I would kind of add to that, should be based on experience with a lot of people over time. That's what you usually think of wise people, knowing all kinds of people. So I think there's that kind of thing going on. As a conjunction of all these things have to come together. Somebody who's arrogant and thinks they know everything, that's not a person who's wise. That's, if you don't agree, please raise your hand. Wave. Okay. What does the breadth and fame of Solomon's wisdom say about Solomon, first of all? We've said some of that already, but the fact that he was famous all over the place. It's the news of his wisdom spread down to Sheba. Okay, people knew about it. What does it say about Israel? What does it say about Israel that it has such a king?
We heard about your wife and started worshiping other gods.
Well, well.
This is right. I lost in your timeline.
Well, it says something about that Israel, it says something about its reputation. What does it say about God? That the king he kind of chose to put on the throne of David is someone of such wisdom at this point.
Thank you.
But he's seeking goodness.
But he's seeking goodness.
God wants Israel to have good things.
Yeah. Right. Now we're going to the temple. What conditions does Yahweh put on his promise about the temple? Are his promises without condition? They say, I'm always going to bless this temple with my presence and receive your gifts, and or does he say, is it a conditional situation? Does Israel have to agree to certain terms? Okay.
Not to worship other gods.
Yeah, this will be this will be the central place for worship. Okay. And really all the kings in the book of Kings are kind of judged by that standard. Is this the only place where God is worshipped? If other places are allowed, if other gods are worshipped, then they're violating the agreement. Okay. Is there a foreshadowing of the coming destruction of the temple and the exile? Yeah.
See Israel becoming divided.
Yeah, there are all kinds of foreshadowings in many different places in the Old Testament, and the foreshadowing of the exile kind of lurks in the background, even in the book of Deuteronomy. You'll see that. Is Solomon the king that Samuel warned against? Samuel's warnings were, if you get a king, then the king will have forced laborers. The king will make you serve in his army. The king will make you give him a share of your produce. The king will have a lot of upkeep.
That started with Saul, though.
Right.
Well, did Saul have forced laborers? And did he have a conscripted army?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Well, the forced
Okay.
laborers that came in because of this building of this temple, that was this mammoth structure. I wonder where the architects came from, the people knew how to build. Egypt, maybe? I don't know.
Phoenicia. Yeah.
Mathematicians.
Yeah. There you mathematician, Roger. Okay, we got just a couple more. Okay. Okay. How does Solomon fall from favor with God?
Worshiping other gods with his
Yeah.
wives.
Yeah.
The women led him astray.
Yeah, the women led him astray. It's the women again. No. But who made the decision to do all that? Yeah.
I have a question about this. See the pool there, washing.
The sea.
What are those things around the base?
They're bulls.
They're what?
Bulls. Bronze bulls.
Oh, they're bronze.
Yeah.
What are those things over there on the table-looking thing?
Well, on which side?
Over here on the left side, what are those? And I noticed there's some on the other side too.
I don't know. I thought you were going to ask me the name of the two pillars.
What is the next one, Roger?
They look like those things that would carry people into certain places, the higher ups.
Yeah, they're
Close look at my reading glasses.
Yeah, they're tables that hold a lot of different, and
Yeah, they're just tables.
shovels and pokers and that kind of thing. And then there's a table somewhere for the showbread.
Yeah.
And the names of the two pillars, one is Boaz and one is Jacob, I think. Is that right, Lonnie?
I learned everything from you.
We got one more question.
Big trouble.
Is there an irony, after all, in calling Solomon wise? Or would you hedge that somewhat? Would you kind of saying yes? Would you say yes, but, or then why?
Well, I think that, I feel comfortable calling him wise because I prefer to think regarding the baby that he, and it never occurred to me until today, so this is bolt out of the blue, another one, that he wanted to place the child in the best hands, the hands
Okay.
of someone who cared for the child.
Okay.
And he did not get embroiled in the minutia of calling two witnesses and this, that, and the other,
Yeah.
and, you know. And in today's parlance, he didn't call for a DNA test. Who would be the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
person to care for this child? I think that's wise.
And he was free in that moment not to adhere to all the peculiar,
That's the rule of love.
okay.
The
Okay.
rule, all these rules, and they're very useful, but sometimes the decision has to be an act of love rather than
Okay.
logic and circumstances. It's just, and maybe that's inspiration from God.
Okay.
Part of that could be that as you go through life, you change. You know, you start out one way and then
Yeah.
life goes on, and like
Yeah.
Solomon's life was very different towards the end. So
Yeah.
there were probably periods of time where it would not be an irony to call him wise. There were other times when maybe he was not as wise or did not make as wise of choices. So I think you have to kind of back from the whole picture and
Okay.
then decide whether overall you want to put that label on. But usually labels change over time, so.
Okay. Megan?
To me, in the broad overview of his story, like there are seasons where he was maybe more wise than others. What I go back to is at the very beginning of his reign, he was wise enough to ask for wisdom. He was wise enough to say, I know that I don't know what I'm doing. I know this is a huge responsibility you've given me, God. I am a child. Who can lead this nation? Like, who can do all of this? And in that moment, to come to God and say, please help me. All the ways he could have, the things he could have asked for, to be given that in that moment. So, yeah, he was a human, he was complex. There's all the things we love and don't love about Solomon.
Oh, yeah.
But I like to go back to that moment in the beginning when he asked for wisdom at the beginning of his reign.
Thank you. That's great. So the openness, the humility, he knew what he needed and he didn't have it. So he asked for it. Okay. That's a good place to end. Thank you, Megan.
I didn't mean to shut it down.
Oh, you didn't. That was kind of the perfect, I think, coming to the main point. Thank you all.
Thank you.